Imagine waking up in a world where the swastika flies over London, Paris, and Moscow, where Nazi Germany rules from the Atlantic to the Urals, and the Holocaust wasn't stopped, but completed. What if Hitler had won World War II? What if D-Day failed? The atomic bomb never fell on Japan, and the Third Reich achieved its vision of a 1,000-year empire? Would resistance movements have eventually overthrown the Nazis? Would humanity have survived under fascist rule? Or would the world today still be living in the darkest timeline imaginable? This is the most terrifying alternate history we can explore, a world where evil triumphed. In our timeline, Nazi Germany came closer to victory than many realized. By 1942, Hitler controlled most of continental Europe. The Wehrmacht stood at the gates of Moscow and Stalingrad. North Africa seemed ready to fall. U-boats were strangling Britain's supply lines. Several critical moments could have changed everything. If Germany had captured Moscow in 1941, if they'd developed the atomic bomb first, if the D-Day invasion had failed, or if the United States had never entered the war was won by narrow margins, industrial capacity, code-breaking, strategic mistakes, and sheer luck. Change just a few variables, and history's darkest regime could have prevailed. But what if those variables had been different? What if the Nazis had made better decisions or gotten luckier? Imagine that in the winter of 1941, Germany captures Moscow. Hitler listens to his generals and focuses everything on taking the Soviet capital instead of splitting forces. The Wehrmacht launches its assault weeks earlier. Before the brutal Russian winter sets in, by December 1941, Moscow falls. Stalin either dies in the fighting or flees east beyond the Urals. The Soviet government collapses into chaos. Without their symbolic center, Soviet resistance fragments. Meanwhile, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, as in our timeline, but with the Soviets collapsing, they invade Siberia instead of Southeast Asia, squeezing the USSR from both sides. By mid-1942, the Soviet Union effectively ceases to exist. Germany controls everything west of the Urals. Japan takes Siberia. The largest nation on Earth is carved up between fascist powers. With the Soviet Union defeated, Hitler turns all his forces westward. Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, is launched in 1943 with overwhelming force. German armies, no longer fighting on two fronts, pour across the English Channel supported by absolute air superiority. The United States, still ramping up its military, cannot intervene in time. The British fight with legendary courage, but they're outnumbered and outgunned. London falls by Christmas 1943. Churchill and the royal family evacuate to Canada. Resistance fighters wage guerrilla war, but the occupation is brutal and efficient. Within a year, Britain is subdued. By 1944, Hitler controls all of Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals. Only Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and Turkey remain technically independent, and they're surrounded by Nazi power. By 1945, the map of Europe is unrecognizable. Germany annexes massive territories: Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and large parts of France. These become integral parts of the Greater German Reich, with 200 million citizens. Puppet states are established everywhere else. Vichy France controls southern France. Fascist governments rule Norway, Denmark, Britain, and the Balkans. All serve German interests. The Holocaust is completed without interruption. By 1945, Jews, Roma, disabled people, and other targeted groups have been systematically murdered. The death toll exceeds 15 million. No one is left to testify. The Nazis attempt to erase all evidence. Slavic populations in the East face Germanization, mass deportations, enslavement, and replacement by German settlers. Tens of millions die. or are displaced in the largest ethnic cleansing in history. The SS becomes a state within a state, running a vast empire of concentration camps, slave labor, and terror. The United States never surrenders, creating a different Cold War. After Britain's fall, America becomes Fortress America. Canada absorbs British refugees. The U.S. develops nuclear weapons by 1945 and warns Germany not to cross the Atlantic. An uneasy stalemate develops. Germany controls Eurasia and Africa. America controls the Western Hemisphere. The world is divided into fascist and democratic spheres. Both sides race for technological supremacy. Germany, with its captured scientists and slave labor, makes frightening advances. America relies on free innovation and its industrial might. By 1950, both sides have nuclear weapons and intercontinental missiles. The threat of mutual destruction prevents direct war, but proxy conflicts rage across the neutral zones. What would daily life be like in Nazi-controlled Europe? The regime enforces total ideological conformity. Every aspect of life is Nazified: education, media, entertainment, even family life. Children are raised in Hitler Youth programs, teaching racial superiority and blind obedience. Propaganda is omnipresent. Giant screens in city squares broadcast Hitler's speeches. Every home must display Nazi symbols. Dissent means death or the camps. Society is rigidly hierarchical based on racial classification. Pure Germans enjoy privileges. Others face discrimination, forced labor, or worse. A genetic registry tracks everyone's ancestry. Women are pushed out of professional life, told their role is producing Aryan children for the Reich. Traditional roles are enforced through law and social pressure. Technology advances in disturbing directions: rockets, jets, and nuclear weapons, but also sophisticated surveillance and control systems. The Gestapo uses early computers to track dissidents. Resistance never dies. Even under total Nazi control, secret networks operate across Europe. Former soldiers, surviving Jews, communists, and ordinary people who refuse to submit form underground organizations. They sabotage factories, assassinate Nazi officials, and preserve banned books and culture. The Nazis respond with collective punishment. For every German killed, they execute hundreds of hostages. Entire villages are destroyed for harboring resistors. Terror is used systematically to crush opposition, but the resistance persists generation after generation. Children are taught in secret to remember freedom. Forbidden music, art, and literature are preserved underground. The flame of resistance never dies, though it costs millions of lives. Some collaborate, hoping to survive or even prosper. Others resist at any cost. European society is torn between those who adapt to evil and those who fight it. By the 1960s, cracks appear in the Nazi Empire. The regime faces the same problem all totalitarian empires face: succession. Hitler dies in the 1950s or 60s, and vicious power struggles erupt between Nazi factions: the SS, the Wehrmacht, the party, and regional governors. The economy, built on slave labor and plunder, becomes unsustainable. Without new territories to conquer, the regime struggles to maintain living standards for Aryan citizens. Colonial rebellions erupt across Africa and Asia, even with brutal repression. The Nazis cannot hold their vast empire indefinitely. Resources are stretched thin. A new generation, raised in peace, begins questioning Nazi ideology. Secret Western radio broadcasts penetrate the Iron Curtain. Ideas of freedom and human rights, preserved by America, slowly spread. The regime becomes paranoid, purging suspected dissidents even within its own ranks. This internal terror weakens the state further. Nazi and American technology develop along different paths. Nazi science, built on slave labor and lacking ethical constraints, makes disturbing breakthroughs in genetic engineering, chemical weapons, and control technologies. They develop sophisticated surveillance systems and behavioral conditioning techniques, but totalitarianism stifles innovation. Without free inquiry and debate, Nazi science stagnates in many areas. The greatest minds either fled to America before the war or were killed by the regime. America, meanwhile, develops computing, space technology, and communications far beyond Nazi capabilities. Silicon Valley flourishes. The internet is invented in the 1970s, but only in the free world that the technology gap becomes the Reich's Achilles heel. By the 1980s, America is a generation ahead in key technologies. The Nazi Empire cannot keep up without freedom of thought. By the 1990s, the Nazi Empire finally collapses. Economic stagnation, succession crises, and resistance movements converge. When hardliners attempt a coup, rival Nazi factions go to war against each other. The empire tears itself apart. America and its allies see their opportunity. They broadcast support for resistance movements. Weapons flow to freedom fighters. One by one, occupied nations rise up. The end comes suddenly, like the Soviet collapse in our timeline. The Berlin Wall, built to keep Germans in rather than others, outfalls in a popular uprising. Mass graves and concentration camps are revealed to the world. Europe is liberated after 50 years of darkness. The surviving collaborators flee or face justice. The process of denazification begins much harder after 2 generations of indoctrination. The psychological scars run deep. An entire generation has known only fascism. Rebuilding democratic institutions and free societies takes decades. So what do you think would have happened if Hitler had won World War II? Could the Nazi regime have lasted 1,000 years? Or was its collapse inevitable? Would resistance movements have eventually prevailed? Or would freedom have been extinguished forever? Share your thoughts in the comments below. But remember, this is the darkest timeline we can imagine. The fact that it didn't happen is something we should never take for granted. Like this video if you found this exploration thought-provoking, and subscribe for more alternate history scenarios. Because sometimes, understanding the worst that could have happened helps us appreciate the world we actually live in, and reminds us to never let such darkness rise again.